Welcome back to another episode of Destin Talks to Random People. This time I have Shannon Liao. Shannon, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Destin. It's great to be here as well. And yeah, awesome.
So I invited you on. I know you because you have been talking about a lot of the Xbox news. I talk about Xbox a lot on this channel. But if people don't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Shannon Liao. I'm a video games journalist. I used to write for the Washington Post. I'm currently a gaming editor at Inverse.com, and you can check us out for like reviews and news. We write about the craft of video games. So yeah.
More recently, you ahead of the Xbox podcast, you broke two stories, I believe. One was about how Xbox has no plans to stop making hardware. And the other was Pal World on all screens from Sarah Bond, right?
Yes, that's right.
Can you tell us a bit more about like those stories, what you found interesting about them?
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you, kind of the origin point for the story is, so there was an internal Xbox town hall just last week on February 6th, and employees tuned in. It was pretty massive, but I think that a lot of the people who attended found it to be a very dull business update. And so when it happened initially, not a lot of people were like, oh, this is definitely news. But over time, over the course of the week, especially because the appetite for Xbox news is so big, and because people are wondering, will Starfield come to PlayStation 5? Will, Hi-Fi Rush come to Nintendo Switch? There are all these questions in the air. So actually, sources reach out to me and let me know, like, oh, these are the things that were said in the town hall. And actually, thinking back to it, we should talk about the whole town hall, and maybe there are some details that you should report out.
Yeah, well, you covered that in the lead up, and then we had the podcast yesterday. Mm-hmm. So overall, let's start with how you felt they did in the podcast, and then what was the reaction like internally that you've heard about?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the podcast almost resembled the town hall, but was more geared towards the public, and so it's more front facing and easier to understand. But similarly, it was, Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond, just like in the town hall. And there was people talking about, the future of Xbox and what you could expect. And we finally got the details around, the four games. Well, we don't even know which four games they are, but we know that there are going to be four games coming to other platforms, and they are Xbox exclusives that are now going to maybe PlayStation, maybe Nintendo Switch. And the kind of reaction to that business update, I would say, has been kind of tepid, honestly, muted. Some people said they didn't even watch it. They were like, well, it's more of the same of things that we expected. And there's been so many rumors and leaks at this point that once the, Xbox podcast came out, it kind of confirmed some of those rumors and leaks. So it wasn't super surprising to those people. But at the same time, it was some news that we hadn't seen before. At least it was confirmation. So that was it was good to watch that. But I would say that, yeah, there wasn't much of a reaction, to be honest.
What was your personal reaction to it? Was yours like sort of muted also? Because for me, they just confirmed a lot of the stuff that we already knew and did say, yes, 4 games will be coming to other consoles. We all know that means PlayStation and Switch. But yeah, like what was your reaction to it? I've seen sort of mixed takes on it.
Yeah. I would say that I was hoping for a little bit more detail, but I understand why they didn't come out and say the 4 names of the games. I'm just thinking like there must be maybe a Nintendo Switch Direct coming later this month. There must be some other announcement coming, and that's when the other companies are going to announce what games are coming to those platforms. At the same time, I was intrigued by the interviews that Phil Spencer did with The Verge, and a little more detail came out. And of course, if you actually message or contact Xbox as a reporter, Xbox will also give you a little more detail than what they initially announced. So that has been helpful. And I think them saying directly oh, there's no Indiana Jones or Starfield coming to PlayStation 5 is notable as well. So that was interesting to me. But yeah, I thought maybe there would be a little bit more. So I was similar to you. I think it's just maybe a teaser for more things to come later this year. So I'm just anticipating future news.
Yeah, well, one of the things they teased was that they're doing something in June, which is kind of interesting. Uh, I am curious. They mentioned new hardware, the biggest leap ever. Uh, there were some interesting things in there, but like it's weird how they were sort of wishy-washy about tell us or don't tell us. They basically not confirmed, but heavily alluded to the idea that it's Pentiment, Hi-Fi Rush, Grounded, and Sea of Thieves, right? And confirming the rumors that Stephen Totillo and I believe some others have corroborated, like Jeff Grubb talked about Sea of Thieves, but no mention of some of the other crazy ones out there. It was nice to see the Starfield Indiana Jones stuff be squashed, at least for now, because in the Verge stuff that you alluded to, it was mentioned like never say never in terms of these games coming to other platforms, right?
Right. Yeah.
So for you, I feel like the podcast calmed things down. I don't know if you mentioned yet, but how do people feel internally? Do they feel like the heat's turned down a little bit now? Because I certainly think it has.
Yeah, yeah. I think internally, the sources that I've been speaking to, they were surprised that there was so much appetite for the news to begin with. They were like, "Oh, our eyes were glazing over when the company held that internal meeting, and so we didn't really think anything of it." And I can't believe it's now carried across the internet, across gaming websites that were very hungry for Xbox news. And I don't think like there was much of a reaction to the podcast, is what I said. But yeah, I agree that it is nice to see the Indiana Jones Starfield news get addressed, so we can see where it goes from there. But I also think, yeah, saying that it's not coming now doesn't mean like Starfield won't come to PlayStation later. I think it's been years that Xbox has been saying, actually, we exist on other platforms, not just console, and we're not really focused only on console. So.
Do you think this is a big shift overall for the industry? Because I have this one of Tom Warren things up right here. He just quote tweeted this thing from The Verge. The opportunity means we're going to see Microsoft and even Sony explore new ways for their games to be played. Sony has followed Microsoft into the game subscription era, launched multiple PlayStation exclusives on PC, and opened up PS5 games to cloud streaming. It even has big ambitions for cross-platform live service games, although some of that is being pushed back due to mixed levels of success. The point is both PlayStation and Xbox are experimenting with how they sell their games and where players experience with them. So do you think this is going to be a continued shift for PlayStation and Xbox in perpetuity?
Yeah, I think he raised really good points. This week was also, on top of every other piece of news that we've covered, it's also like Sony's earnings. And so they came out and said, like PlayStation 5 could be doing better. And there were a number of pieces of news they announced there. So I think, yeah, like just like Xbox, PlayStation has been, also investing in cloud gaming with the PlayStation Plus and subscription service, PlayStation Plus, and also the cloud gaming service PlayStation Now. So they've always tried to diversify, and I think that you'll always see with like rival companies, if one company is doing something, another company might follow suit. So it is what Tom Warren is tweeting there makes sense. We don't have any concrete details there, but I think if we can kind of like speculate, and it makes sense like if they would follow suit.
It makes sense to us. I find it very fascinating that so many people online get like really upset about the idea of a game like Hi-Fi Rush going to a competing platform. One of the things I was really glad to hear about was Phil say, hey, we're doing that because it's going to fund development of a Hi-Fi Rush 2 or other first-party games, which they talked about over on Xbox Wire. And then their vision for the future, as here, I'll just bring it up really quick, as The Verge, Tom Warren again, talked about, we have a different vision for the future of gaming, a future where players have a unified experience across devices, a future where players can easily discover a vast array of games with a diverse spectrum of business models, a future where more creators are empowered to realize their creative vision, reach a global audience, unite their communities, and succeed commercially, a future where every screen is an Xbox. Now, to me, that's basically what you had heard in your piece about the future, this is a future where Xbox is everywhere. So that seems to be like a slogan or a mantra that they're continuing to have internally at the Xbox company, but it's been there for like ever, right?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, back in 2020, like 4 years ago, I was interviewing Xbox executives, and they were saying that to me. And back then, I was like, "Oh, wow, you're really not just focusing on the console. That's so interesting to me." But having done this for several years now, I realize they actually repeatedly say that kind of thing, and it makes sense if you look at their kind of like console hardware sales numbers. It makes sense to diversify across different platforms and also with cloud gaming. And then at the same time, yeah, it's just something that they've been saying. And at the town hall, actually, it was described to me that there was a photo of Power World on like all these different devices they're talking about. So they were using Power World to illustrate the idea of every screen is an Xbox, and that could be console, TV monitors, or PC. It could also be handhelds.
I'm curious, do you agree with Phil's statement that the exclusive will become less important and less of a thing over the next couple of years?
Yeah, this is an interesting idea that when we were looking at the Microsoft acquiring Activision Blizzard trial and against the FTC, there were a lot of documents that came out and a lot of testimony. I think at that point there were people saying, actually, we don't really care about the exclusive thing. We just we need to do it. Like a lot of the people testifying were saying, oh, it's not really something that we would really want, but we still do it because it's our rivals are doing it, so we have to follow suit. So it is possible that they could consider other kinds of business models, or maybe like have a timed exclusive and then eventually bring things over. We saw like Persona 5 or the Persona series, for instance, used to be just PlayStation, and now it's on Xbox as well. And like there's just a lot of gradually some of these series will migrate over. So it does make sense. But I do think that there is like a fond place in the gamer's heart, or in the average person is expecting like, okay, I'm buying the next console, and it's going to make sense because there's something I can't get anywhere else. And so like there should be some remnant of that in the next generation is what I'm guessing. But of course we don't know.
Yeah, I think we're at a really interesting time just industry wide because Fortnite really changed a lot, especially, or even going back further, thinking on it, Minecraft also changed a lot because Minecraft and Fortnite, games of that size, they are the platform. It's not about where you play it, it's about the game that you're playing. And they become bigger than any one manufacturer, where basically if you don't have Fortnite on your console, you're kind of like a strange outlier. And I think that's a really interesting shift. Because if you read, I believe it was called Game Over, and they talked about like the history of Nintendo and how important the console was back in the NES era versus today, where the younger generation is playing less and less on one particular device. They kind of just want to play with whatever's available to them. I have been a little bit surprised about how quickly this shift is coming, and I think it's catching people off guard. Do you agree with that sort of idea that people are just sort of surprised by this, or at least the older generation like myself?
Yeah. I would say that, yeah, we kind of we're slowly moving away from just the $60 box set of, or box game, and into like, live service and other platforms and business models. But I think there's like room for both, and they're both so kind of growing. And you bring up a really good point about Fortnite. I remember when Halo Infinite was delayed, there was actually a consumer survey looking at, what are Xbox players looking forward to when the Series X comes out? Like, what is the game they're most anticipating playing? And it was Fortnite. And that answer was kind of underwhelming because you could play Fortnite on any platform, so you don't necessarily need to buy Series X. And that report was followed with, other reports saying like, oh, the Series X is still in stock and is selling well, but is not sold out as much as PlayStation 5. So yeah, those were all interconnected thoughts. And I think, yeah, just like there are, like Paul World is on every platform. So for instance, like Xbox said, oh, it's Paul World is our biggest third party launch on the Game Pass, but at the same time, Paul World is on Steam, it's elsewhere, it's available. So you don't really necessarily, again, need to have an Xbox to play that game.
Yeah, exactly. And like even PlayStation, their console sales, they've admitted in their earnings report, are softer than they had hoped for. Now, obviously, the PlayStation 5 is selling very, very well, but even they're saying, well, we're kind of hitting this cap in terms of sell through for our software. We need to be more aggressive with our PC strategy, which to me says day and date for PlayStation in the future. Do you think that's where they're going with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is super far in the future. It's really hard to say as well. But yeah, if they are looking for, more ways to capture audience and they're struggling in that way, like that's one of the possible solutions that they could take. I mean, can't really think of like other possible venues for them, like console sales in
Xbox.
general. Oh yeah, to come to
Yeah.
Xbox. Okay, okay, yeah, Xbox and PC. But I think they would still be. Those are still like almost the same strategy. Just like
Mhm.
let's just move to Nintendo Switch and PC and Xbox. Like that's all kind of following the footsteps of what Xbox is announcing here. So yeah, I would still consider all of that like the umbrella under the umbrella of the same strategy of just diversifying. I think like console sales, like it's always reached like developing countries, and there's just like a limit to how many people can afford consoles in general in the whole world. And then there's like countries where consoles were banned for so many years, like China. So those people are not going to switch their habits suddenly and like buy one. So it comes to a point where you reach a limit of how much you can expand your current audience.
Yeah, and in addition to all that, I do think that the phone is proving to be a very powerful tool for game developers because we have Resident Evil 4 and Death Stranding on it. So mobile is a
Yeah.
huge growth opportunity. I know PlayStation's beefing up their mobile. I am curious where Nintendo fits in all this, though. We have the report basically breaking right now that they're saying that
Mhm.
the Switch 2 is actually going to launch next year and not this year. I believe Andy
Mhm.
Robson over at VGC broke that, and then it was corroborated by Eurogamer that like just happened. So who knows what Nintendo's going to do? Like they tried mobile, they said we're getting out of mobile. I don't know. They're kind of a wild card in all this.
Yeah, yeah. I actually wrote so many stories about this and looked into it for so long. Just the idea of like, Nintendo was like, oh, we messed up there, and then we were going to go back into it. And they still have some games. And I think I even wrote a story about how Mario Kart or Mario Run on iPhones had like a very large microtransaction that people didn't want to buy, and it was like not doing very well. But like yeah, I think that mobile, and that also comes from like the Microsoft, Activision, Blizzard FTC trial that came out where Phil Spencer was like, oh, like mobile gaming is so huge, but Halo is not available on mobile, and so now we have to find another way forward, like cloud gaming. So that, yeah, mobile is definitely kind of where the biggest slice of the pie is now, and where a lot of like Gen Z is playing their games, and there's less of the stigma of like, oh, if you're playing on mobile, you're not a real gamer. You're just playing a casual game because, like you said, all the very mechanically advanced games are slowly making their way over to mobile, and so that could be the future as well. And that would have to so PlayStation and Nintendo have to figure out something around that.
Yeah. Yeah. I am sort of curious where they end up going with it all. You brought up the FTC trial. Do you
Mhm.
think any of this is just them worried that the FTC appeal is going to go through? Because that is still ongoing. They actually just filed something where they here I will do it live. I brought
Okay,
it.
sure.
I had this ready just in case we went to it. But
Oh
like,
wow.
yeah, the FTC said the FTC has complained to the Federal Appeals Court about Microsoft's 1900 Activision and Blizzard layoffs. The FTC argues the move undermines Microsoft's claims that Activision Blizzard would operate independently. And basically, long story short, Microsoft basically said, hey, look, so Activision was going to fire a bunch of people anyway. So this was coming regardless, which was something that I discussed on Twitter because, like, I don't think anybody's arguing that the 1,900 layoffs are very unfortunate and just a terrible thing that's happening in the industry right now, just
Mhm.
overall. But the idea that this is solely because of the merger, I think it's a little bit of a narrow view of the overall situation of what's happening in the markets right now. And
Yeah.
in addition to all
Yeah.
that, sorry to go off a little bit on this one. In addition to all that, though, Activision also hired way up before the merger was like going through. Bobby Kotick had hired something like 2,000 additional employees, probably to make the business look healthier and there's so many factors at play. There was COVID, everybody overhired during COVID, and now I think we're sort of seeing the dust settle from all of that happening. My question to you was, as a roundabout way of getting back to it, do you think that Microsoft is still worried about this FTC thing that's ongoing? And that's part of why they're like, oh, we're bringing our games everywhere.
Oh, that's a really interesting point because yeah, part of the FTC trial is proving whether or not Microsoft is acting monopolistically. So you could speculate like, oh, it now makes them look better to bring all the games everywhere, and that was like a point in the trial of exclusives. Like if you buy Bethesda and ZeniMax, now you have exclusives to like Starfield. You're gonna buy Activision Blizzard and have exclusives to Diablo and World of Warcraft and all of these. And so that was a point that they were raising back then. But I would say like when I was reporting on that trial, all the different experts I consulted, most of them thought that the FTC doesn't really have a case here. Like they can keep trying to appeal, but ultimately that merger went through, and we'll see if the appeal goes anywhere. But nobody was really like that optimistic about it. And I think the reason I brought up the trial to begin with was not to say like it's still relevant today, but just that it was like that unique look at those internal emails from Phil Spencer and how he thought about the mobile business. But we'll see. Like that's also an ongoing story as well. And I think you raised some great points about the layoffs. I think that there's a lot of layoffs going across the entire industry, so it's really hard to say if it is due to the merger or not. I think that company has a lot of reasons they can get into for the layoffs. So.
No, I think part of it is the merger, but to say that's the only reason, I just think it's not your. I've seen a lot of people just say, "See, the merger was bad," and I'm like, "There's a lot more going on than just the merger right now that I think needs to be taken at least into consideration." I'm not defending the fact that the layoffs happened. I think the $3 trillion company should have been able to plan for that appropriately ahead of the merger closing, and it's really unfortunate that it happened. But I just think nothing's always like perfectly cut and dry, right? Like there's more to the story than just that one facet of it. What was I saying here? I had a few more questions for you.
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's like a fair thing to say. Just there's always so many different things going on inside those companies. We can only report on as much as we can, but
yeah. Do you think Xbox, well, you sort of alluded to it at the beginning of the interview, but like, do you think that Xbox is leading the way to a future where there are fewer exclusives? Because I feel like maybe PlayStation actually gets more games on the Xbox ecosystem, whatever you want to call it. They've already done it with MLB The Show. There were games that launched exclusively on PlayStation that are now on Xbox Game Pass, like Stray is an example that comes to the top of mind. I am curious if this shift with Xbox buying Activision and their strategy of allowing some of their games to come out on PlayStation is going to make a friendlier environment for business, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're always having these ongoing discussions. Like again, through that trial, we saw a lot of just like those negotiations between Microsoft and PlayStation over Call of Duty. Like, how long can we have Call of Duty for? Can we, and like for 10 years, or like they also Microsoft came out with like agreements with different platforms saying, oh, we agree to keep Call of Duty on Nintendo Switch for 10 years and all this. So there's always ongoing discussions between those companies. And in terms of like your question of will Xbox lead the way, I think that it is now like heading in that direction of like, yes, Xbox came out with this statement saying they're going to add these 4 games, and then that opens the door to adding more games. And of course, opens the door to, PlayStation and Nintendo Switch following, or Nintendo with the next console following suit. But I think that PlayStation and Nintendo historically have just like, been very beloved for their select games and exclusives, and they've been doing this for decades and decades. So there is maybe like less of a likelihood from them. But again, like I mentioned, Persona and like Atlas, like there are examples of their exclusives now coming out to other platforms as well. So it can't be ruled out either.
Yeah, I think Nintendo is in a really interesting spot where they make so much money just by releasing a new Pokemon but there's not a ton of reason for them to release on other platforms. Their shareholders seem very happy. Everybody's really happy with Nintendo. PlayStation, however, is starting to say we're not making enough money. We have razor thin profit margins on some of these properties, or negative in some cases with certain ones. I believe we heard about that, and they're looking for ways to maximize revenue growth because console
Yeah.
sales haven't really grown, and I do wonder if we are working towards a future where we're just going to have a PlayStation app on our TV and an Xbox app on our TV, and then we boot up whatever we want and play it there. Sure, there will always be consoles, but yeah, I just feel like we are working towards more of a, for lack of, I don't know, PC type future where I can just play everything on my PC, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I got into games journalism like 5 years ago, and I went to the very last E3 before it shut down, and everyone at E3 was talking about, oh, well, are consoles over? I think that comes up every few years. Like,
Yeah.
are consoles dying? Are they over? And like, is it mobile gaming now? And even 5 years ago, they were like, oh, it's cloud gaming now, and we've got examples. You can check it out here, and like all these different games are on our library. So I think that was, we're heading in that direction, but at the same time, you need really good Wi-Fi
Mhm.
to use cloud gaming, and so that also like limits the market for that. I think that, like you mentioned, like Nintendo is doing so well still. They share all their sales numbers for all their games, and you can see how many tens of millions they are selling of copies of like games like Zelda and Mario, and at the same time. They have like the handheld form factor, which is another thing that PlayStation and Xbox don't necessarily have. Where like PlayStation just came out with the PlayStation Portal, and that's like a longer screen version where you still have to connect it to your console. And I actually reviewed it for Inverse, and I was like, this is like very hard to connect, and it won't leave my house. If I don't have Wi-Fi, it stops working. So it's not really like a fix for the whole handheld situation. I think that we might be moving towards something that's more convenient for people. Like again, like the Steam Deck too, like is another example of people are now easily able to play their very complicated PC games on the go, and so that's going to be a challenge to Xbox and PlayStation as well.
Yeah, I personally, I think that's I think that's where we'll see the most growth. And you brought up that you've been in media, or at least covering games, for about 5 years. How
Mhm.
has the landscape shifted in just that amount of time that you've been doing it?
Yeah, oh, that's a great question. It's a huge amount. So many things happened. I've seen people like launch their games and they were talking about them and they're like, "Oh, this is going to be so great," and then it just shuts down immediately. So I've seen like all these multiplayer, battle royale games come out and not succeed. There's also like Mixer came in and went.
Forgot
The
about
streaming
Mixer.
platform by Microsoft. Yeah, yeah, that was such a huge deal. And Ninja moved over, and that was like really epic, and like they paid him $10 million. I reported on that, and then just a few months later, they had to shut down their platform, and it seems like all the different tech giants were investing in gaming, but not many of them found their foothold. Like Google Stadia also, I think is no longer around, and that was a huge push as well for a while, and then also I saw Cyberpunk, and their bungled kind of launch, but also their updates going forward. So just a lot of things. So many things have happened. It's really hard to summarize, but I just think that it's also like there was also a contrast of in the beginning, especially like when the pandemic started, the gaming was hyped up, and now it's in this economic downturn or whatever we're going through right now. And I think that it seems cyclical, though. It seems like people are just kind of buckling down right now and hunkering down until the next big announcement or big news, or when they can finally find some funding again.
Yeah, I agree with that actually. It does feel like it's a bit of a quiet year. Granted, Xbox
Mhm.
has a ton of stuff. Like we're going to get Hellblade, Indiana Jones, potentially some sort of new hardware this year from Xbox. But with the news that Nintendo's pushing to next year, with PlayStation saying that they're in I mean, it's a factual statement. So I think the reaction to it's a little overblown. But the fact that they're in the latter half of the console generation, I'm like, yeah, I mean, like accurate. It's just an accurate
Yeah.
statement, but people seem really
Right.
upset that they said that. Um,
Yeah, yeah, you kind of alluded to like people being upset about the Xbox news and the PlayStation news. I think there is an element of yeah, parasocial relationships. I saw one analyst tweeted like just a screenshot of a guy saying it feels like Xbox is cheating on me if they bring Starfield to PlayStation 5, and it's never that serious. So yeah, there's just a lot of overblown reactions.
I think it's a perfectly normal reaction to think that. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
It's a little
okay.
much, right?
Right.
I absolutely agree with that. Shannon, thank you for joining me and talking about the industry, about Xbox. Where should, like, you have so many different things out there that you work on, and you collaborate with everybody. I think you collaborate with IGN for the FTC case. That's where
I
you
did.
and I think, talked for the first time.
Mhm.
So, where should people go find your stuff?
Yeah, I mean, if you use X at all, I'm on there. My name is Shannon underscore LIO. But if not, you can just go to inverse.com. All everything in the gaming section goes through me, and we just try to write as much news as possible. And yeah, thanks so much for having me, Dustin. I really appreciate it. I love collaborating with you on that trial news, and love what you're doing on this channel too.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, your stories keep coming up, and I was like, I should ask Shannon because she's breaking all these cool little town hall things, and I'd love to hear her thoughts on how everything went. All right, it's
Oh,
the end of the
thanks so much.
episode. I always worry that this part's going to break, so I'm going to do my little outro thing. All right, thank you, Shannon. Thank you so much to the members for supporting. If you want to become a member, you can click that join button. I really do appreciate all of the members who have supported the channel. Shannon, thank you again so much. Let's see if I can find the outro button. All right, I'm going to get out of here, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye, everybody.